I am Ira Kirschenbaum. I am the editor of the Journal of Orthopedic Experience and Innovation. We have tonight a very exciting topic session, entrepreneurship, how to get to the finish line. We have quite a few speakers from the panel. We have David Kay, Kevin Bana, JP Warner, Craig McAllister, and there are a number of other people. Kevin Plancher's on, Greg Brown, Paul Bruning, Eugene Malinsky from originally Arthro Free, sorry, now Lazarite. So there's a lot of people who will be adding quite a bit to this discussion. I just want to make a statement that in the chat I put up a sign up for the Joey Mixer. Last year's Joey Mixer got 270 people. Go figure. So I would like to start with going around table with all the panel guests and just talk a little bit about your experience, where you come from, a little bit in entrepreneurship and ideas, whether they're ideas for industry, anywhere else. And then my first question after that, after your introduction of each of you, is going to be, how do you define the finish line? I wrote, you get to the finish line, how do you define it? So David, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody, and we'll get that all going.
Yeah, so David Kay, ortho foot and ankle in Akron, Ohio. And when I started in practice, I had these multiple different activities I was doing. Advisor to grad students in BME, so doing a lot of mechanical testing work, wound center work, and then a pretty busy, heavy practice in deformity correction and trauma, as well as reconstructive surgery. First thing was actually a wound center. So if you want to know what I did, I was making rounds one day, and it was crazy. I'm hunting everybody down saying, we got a terrible process and we can't be successful. Same patient, a lot of us taking care of the same patient, same problem, and we're just not working together. So the first thing was recognizing that we had a process problem. And that's actually one of my themes. I like to look at the process and improve the process.
All right. Craig McAllister, I owe a lot to, because he replaced both of my knees. And then I guess it was too much for him, so he retired. So, so tell us about your journey.
Yet again, one of your major lapses in judgment. But yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah. So, I can't really say that we set out to be entrepreneurs, right? We had built a surgery center, and that was a bit of an entrepreneurial activity. But really, what started these two companies was, a need that needed to be filled, and no one was there to fill it. So we just decided to do it on our own. I don't think we really had this idea that we were going to start a company. In fact, really, the company got started because
Which company are you talking about?
I'm going to stick with Operative, the medical device company.
Okay.
As Ira is alluding to there, we've actually started two different companies. Both of them have been, financial successes. The first one we bootstrapped, and it managed to be in the black, and it's an FDA registered company, and we make disposables for originally computer navigation and subsequently now for robotics. And we compete directly with one of the major device companies for those contracts. And we've been successful in signing with some major IDNs. But really, we never thought in the beginning, we want to start this company. We were just designing new pins and new devices because we wanted to use computer navigation and not have a huge incision. And that led to 4 or 5 patents. And unfortunately, the only way to actually deliver the products to the surgeon was to start our own company and get FDA registered and sell it ourselves, because none of the big device, it wasn't a big enough margin for the device companies to pick up. So our road to entrepreneurship was basically, the P's: product, passion, people, perseverance, and this vision that this reality that people wanted the products. So we just took every next step necessary to get there.
Great. Kevin Bonner from
Yes.
Virginia Beach.
So no, mine's Kevin Bonham in Virginia Beach, and so I'm not on the same grand scale. I've not started 2 or 3 or 4 companies. I sort of come from the background of, like probably a lot of us, way back when. This is my 26th year starting doing different consulting work and coming up with different ideas, and then realizing over time that when you develop ideas with other companies, that's not your idea, that's their idea. And that, then over time, started developing some of my own ideas. And I was telling Ira earlier, my pathway has been that most of my quote unquote good ideas, I think of at 2 a.m. and 99% of them are bad ideas for one reason or another by 6 a.m. And the other 95% are bad ideas within 2 weeks when you start doing IP searches and everything else. So then going from, quote unquote, being a hired help as a consultant, coming up with ideas that you ultimately own 0.25% or 0.5% or 1%, started realizing that if you truly come up with a unique, good idea and you get a patent attorney, then there's really, if it's truly a good idea and it has legs, you can develop it yourself. And then there's various different ways you can go. If you can get many ideas, then you can form your own company. But then if you have 1 or 2, good ideas starting smaller, then you could potentially do deals with company in terms of whether it be licensing or selling the IP or doing it together. And there's various different routes you can go. So I've had multiple experiences along that line in terms of developing different IP, and developing it via different mechanisms based on, how good I thought it was going to be and where I thought that we could take it. So again, I'm on not as grand of a scale as starting multiple companies. I've had a few good ideas that have sort of made it. And so I come from that perspective.
Awesome. JP, how are you tonight?
Yeah, I'm good. So it's been a journey of about 33 years now for me. And I've been the academic track. And I have to say, my impression is that people in the academic world tend not to be so innovative because, and my friend Christian Gerber said, knowledge is the enemy of innovation, because you believe what you believe and mostly half of it's wrong. And so it's sort of a stale environment. And it took me years to figure that out. And along the way, I've been on multiple design teams early on with arthroscopy companies. I've been on 5 different arthroplasty design teams and realized I enjoyed that. And then the first company that we sold was Tenet Medical with a spider arm holder, which I helped design, and the beach chair. I didn't know anything about business, but I helped them with a licensing agreement and then subsequent acquisition by Smith & Nephew. And then subsequently, having gone to Harvard Business School to some of the executive programs, I did the full deal there. And then I sold 2 more companies after that. So I've had 3 successes, 3 failures, and I have right now 14 additional ongoing interests, of which probably the biggest one is ViewMedi, where I was one of the first investors, and now I'm on the board and play a big role with that. And what I find the most interesting here is that you learn human nature. You all work together in the same direction. That generally doesn't happen in a hospital setting. Whatever you call the finish line, everybody's rowing towards it in unison. If you have a good company, the ones that have failed, you can always feel the chemistry is not so good. And in some instances, there's outright deceit and bad things. One of my companies that failed, I had to give an interview to the FBI and the DOJ because I was an outside board member. So I understand that part of it too. So all I can say is you learn a lot more from failure than from success. But the journey is really so much fun and so interesting, and you're constantly on a vertical learning curve that, when you finally arrive, even though it's great to cash out, it's a little bit anticlimactic, and I find myself looking for the next thing. So I realized along the way that the process of being entrepreneurial is far more interesting, and I get my hygiene factors outside my organization, which is Mass General, rather than inside the organization. And that's kind of the pivot I've made in my career. And so I spent a lot of time with that, but it's not really, it doesn't feel like work. It feels like fun.
It's amazing. I want to thank you for that. I think that a lot of people also want to know, and I want to open up the floor also. If anyone has a question, you could either raise your hand through the reaction, you could actually talk and interrupt me, or you can put a question in the chat box. So please feel free to do it that way. So how do you decide? How do you get started? I mean, what are the first steps? You see a need, you see an idea, maybe someone else comes up with an idea, and you're the person who can help execute it. Where do we take it from? Where do you go from there? I'll start with JP, and then we'll work around. And if anyone else out there wants to say something, be very, very happy to hear from people. Okay.
So first of all, I'd say that most surgeons feel that they have original ideas and they never take something without modifying it and saying, this is my modified approach of whatever. I want to refer everybody to a very accessible, very, very good presentation on what you just asked about. And that was by Lanny Johnson, one of the consummate innovators. I mean, for those of you who don't know him, he trained many, many famous people. And he co-held the patent for shaver blades, among many other things. He created a company named Instrument Maker, which he sold, I don't know, 25, 30 years ago to Smith & Nephew for $100 million. And he gave a talk on innovation and how to innovate at the last Codman Shoulder Society annual meeting. And if you just Google Codman Shoulder Society, you can find that lecture, which is on ViewMedi. So he talks about the frustrating elements of it, because if you're a founder, it's a lot different than what I'm doing. I'm joining organizations and working with them with different roles, be it scientific officer or on the board or whatever. But when you're all in and you're the founder, there are a lot of sleepless nights. It's a lot of strain and stress. I think that that's what he talks about. I've not undertaken that yet, because the way I look at it is kind of like having a portfolio of companies. I'm going to lose, I'm going to win, kind of like VCs approach things. So how do you get started? Business is built on relationships. So start reading, start learning, go to executive programs, meet with people that are innovators, that sort of thing. Just show up, and you learn in the process. You can read books about it, but you learn in the process. And a lot of it is working with companies initially and trying to help them create products for which you may have a consulting arrangement or a royalty arrangement. But I can tell you that equity is always better. It's just higher risk. And that's kind of how I went about it. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And I had a lot of people, teach me, mentor me along the way. And it takes time to become knowledgeable about these things and understand people. And that's kind of about the best I can say there. I think others may have more wisdom on that, but at the end of the day, it's a privilege to work with people who are, if you're in the right, let me say this, you're in the right group if you're in a room where everybody's smarter than you. You're in the wrong room if you feel like the smartest person in the room. And if you're lucky enough to find those rooms with really smart people, then you go on a journey that will be really enjoyable and probably have a good ending.
Great. So, David, how do people get started? You were walking through this wound center, or what's the first steps for what was for you in a sense?
So I've taken a very different approach. I've done consulting work for companies, but I've done this whole startup from inception all the way through to exit. And probably the one to talk about would be Orthopaedic, which was the implant company I founded. So I had these ideas, saw these patterns of fixation in the lab. Nobody was making implants. Foot and ankle world, nobody knew existed back in the 1990s and early 2000s. It was just this mystery of, you just need K-wires. And I said, no, we need better implants. So every company turned me down. I said, okay, I need to get some help. Let's get this started. No model, no mentor, nobody. A lot of sleepless nights. I can't begin to tell you the number of sleepless nights, raising the funds for it, getting things launched in 2004, with the plan that we had the basic implants and we were going to staircase this up and continuously improve the implants. We knew full well that we were going to be copied. We knew that, but we were going to out-generation everybody. And that was our plan. We were going to move faster and we were going to move better. And we had developed a level of trust with our user base, and our user base was growing very, very fast. When you do these, you have to think commercialization. That's the one thing that tends to be forgotten, and what that actually means. If you're going to stay as a company, or if you intend to exit in some way, you've got to consider the commercialization. I also carry another hat that most folks don't carry. I'm a hospital owner. Our group actually owns the hospital. So I'm paying the bills for all those implants. So I can kind of look at it from, what are those decisions behind the doors? How are those decisions made? So you start off with an idea, or actually you want to start off with a problem. How are you going to solve that problem? As I said earlier, I like to address the process. How can we simplify the process? How can I get something done in 2 steps instead of 20 steps? Because there's real value to everybody when you do that. And it doesn't happen the first time. It's a lot of work, but OrthoHelix was quite a ride. I can get into some things later on as far as just what the exit was like, especially when you work with VCs.
That's great. Kevin, when you have an idea,
Yeah, I think that for a lot of people, let's just say, instead of just starting a company, I have not gotten to the level of starting a company until just recently, actually, where we've had an idea that we're developing, that we're actually developing a company around it. But other than that, previously, just for a lot of the audience may be interested, when you have what you think is a good idea, what do you do with it? What can you do with it? And, a lot of ideas are probably not good enough to maybe start a whole company, but they're maybe good enough that you can develop it to the point where a company wants to buy it. And so I think the first thing, there's various different avenues to develop it. In part, I think the first thing you just want to start out with is just looking at IP to say, listen, are you really the first person who came up with this? And what kind of IP concerns are there going to be? So the first thing is to look at prior IP. And then if you do that initial search and you don't think that's going to be an issue, you have to get yourself a patent attorney. So there are a lot of good patent attorneys, but you really want to focus on those that have experience with medical devices, especially in the surgical world. So I would make that recommendation, is to find a good patent attorney who has a lot of experience with medical devices. And then you take it to the next level and you say, okay, depending on what the idea is, you're going to need some money and you're going to need some help. And the question is, most of us don't have a lab to develop a lot of things. So you need help to do that. So you can take it to different partners. There are different engineering companies, not to get too into the weeds with this, but there are different engineering companies now that deal with entrepreneurs. And if you have a good idea, you don't even have to pay them. They just want a part or a stake in your company and your idea. So that's one way you can go. Another way is you can just fund it all yourself if you think it's a good idea. So you can go that pathway. And then when you get to a certain level, you could take it to different companies and basically shop it around. But the key is the more you could develop it on your own, the greater the stake you're going to have and the more value it's going to be to you. The more you sort of sell it off sooner, the less value to you. And that's where you get into the scenario where we've all seen, where we do consulting and we're on development boards and committees and development and designer teams. And those are all great. And I've been on multiple designer teams, but you're giving away a lot by doing that. So the further you can develop an idea on your own, certainly from a financial standpoint, the better you're going to do in the end, as long as it's a good idea. So there's different pathways you can take it. But just for those who come up with a good idea, start with, again, looking at the IP, get yourself a good patent attorney, and then there's different avenues where you can take it with even different engineering companies, et cetera, where you don't have to spend a lot of money.
Craig, what are your thoughts?
Well, I just can't tell you how much I agree with a lot of the points that have been made. Although, Kevin, as important as patent attorneys are, I would never mention a patent attorney and then not spend a lot of money in the same sentence, because they are wildly expensive, and it's a complex road that you go down. But I absolutely agree with what you're saying. The other thing that I really resonated with was when John was talking about the different models of starting a company, which basically boiled down to whether or not you're a founder and you're going to carry it on your own shoulders going forward, or if you're going to be a part of you're going to try to put together a larger entity. And I also agree with the idea that the longer you can keep this within your own ownership and be very, very careful about taking on new partners, those partners, it's not a matter of them just bringing in cash. They need to bring some skill set to your company that as John pointed out, you don't ever want to be the smartest one in the room. You want to make sure that your partners that you're bringing on are not only smarter than you are in some key function that you need, but that they have skin in the game for the long haul. So you asked, Ira, what's the next step? I agree also with what people said. Ideas are easy. I mean, they're everywhere. Anytime you run into an obstacle in your work world, smart people come up with ideas all the time. Heck, Kevin, I think, was saying he has them in his sleep at night. But the next really hard step is some sort of a product, some sort of a model, some sort of a thing that you can throw across the table and somebody can touch and look at. And so that's engineering. And quite honestly, once you start down that engineering road and you start showing that product to somebody, you got about a 12-month period of time to lock down any IP. You can file at that point very inexpensively a 1-year provisional patent, which doesn't really take much in terms of lawyering. And then the clock starts where you have to prove to yourself that this product, as David said, can be commercialized. Unfortunately, commercializing when you're beholden on a device company that doesn't own it in its majority means that you got to figure out shelf space. And I think that's one of the hardest things. There's a product, IP, and then a way to sell it, even though you might be in direct competition with some of those device companies.
Yeah, interesting. So I'm going to switch gears slightly. We have two people in the audience who are superb entrepreneurs. I'm going to Eugene Malinsky and Alan Resnick. I'm going to ask Eugene just to introduce yourself and tell us your story a bit.
Sure. Thank you, Ira. Hello, everyone. I'm Eugene Malinsky. My company is Lazerate. We're based in Cleveland, so not actually very far from Dr. David Kay. Quick background is I'm a serial entrepreneur. This is Lazerate is actually my 5th company. And then directly prior to Lazerate, I actually was doing something similar to what Kevin was, which is consulting. But I actually had a consulting firm that was doing medical device consulting. And as Kevin said, eventually you realize you don't actually own anything. We got to develop some amazing products in orthopedics and cardiac and some other areas. We were famous, infamous, and we really got to do some great stuff. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we didn't really own any of those developments. We were paid for them, but we didn't own them. And I knew I was going to end up in a place where I'm like, I want to have my own company, my own IP that's different, goes back to something else I was doing. And I so happened to be in an operating room where I was observing. It happened to be an ASC. It was an ortho case. Patient was on the table, intubated, draped. We're seconds away from starting surgery. And a PA walked by the table and tripped and fell on the cables from the camera that they were about to start using. And it was a disaster, right? Like she tripped, she fell, she was actually out for a long time. The surgery was scrubbed. It was a disaster. But I'm standing there sort of, this is the idea. Can I make a wireless camera? Turns out that the answer is yes. It's actually a resounding yes. It only took about 7 years of work, significant amount of money, lots of investors running into every problem in the world. but I'm very happy to say that sort of we're probably coming close to the end of the journey, at least for Ortho-Free. We have some other things we're working on where we really commercialized earlier this year. We've started taking orders, and we are the only company that has a FDA cleared fully wireless surgical camera.
Wow.
And we started doing our cases in orthopedics. We have 97 orthopedic investors on our cap table who have been amazing champions for us. And so we've started commercializing it in orthopedics. And just recently, about 2 months ago, we started doing our first endo and lab cases because our FDA, talking about FDA registration and clearance, our FDA clearance is for any minimally invasive surgery. So we are starting to branch out, and some of the larger companies are starting to notice, and it's getting real interesting.
Wow. That's amazing. And Alan, can you tell us a bit your story? You're on mute, young man. Alan, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm laughing a little bit. I think some people have said some really interesting things right away, and one of them is learning from mistakes. I think I've managed to make every mistake possible and still not gotten it all there yet. I have been an investor in ViewMedi, and I've made a couple of inventions of my own. And I've had some success with some bigger companies making them and some smaller companies making them. But I've really learned some hard lessons along the way, and I would echo them back to everyone who's starting out. And one of them is to make sure that the company you're working with is aligned with your agenda. Many times, and I've had this happen to me with J&J, they were very happy to make the product. Their personal internal agenda was at the time, and I think they still have a problem with this, is their product managers are every 18 months, but it takes them 2 years to develop something. So you never have the same product manager from beginning to end, and every time a new one jumps on, they're reinventing the wheel. And that could be frustrating. They also sometimes will do a project that the people who are very much interested in the project are no longer involved in marketing it. And they could bury it just accidentally. And then sometimes they miss the market. They price it out of the market, even though it could sell a lot at a lower price. And so all those things are hard things to figure out. And when they happen to you, you're often shocked. You know, you'd say, well, what happened to the device? My favorite story is early on, I developed this grasper grabber that was a little bit unique, and J&J picked it up and started selling it. And I brought some well-known people to the booth to show it to them. And the device was so interesting that they were all stolen the first morning at the Academy from the booth. And that happened 4 years in a row, and J&J couldn't figure out that the product was extremely interesting, so interesting that people were willing to steal it immediately and not pay for it because they really liked it and thought since they had it at a booth, it was a giveaway. So that was frustrating. So there's little things like that. I think the nice thing is to have a partner that's smart. I have a new venture right now that I'm a 50% owner, and where the founder and I have completely different backgrounds. And we're bringing totally different ideas to the table. And fortunately, the founder has a company that's successful behind him, so we can co-opt the staff from the successful company to do projects. So for me, I'm not hiring people who have expertise. He just picks up the phone and calls the expert to solve the problem. And that's been really, really good and very different from my other experiences in the past. So, you know, that's some of the take-home messages. The patent thing, I would say, my very first patent, I drew all the drawings myself. I filed it myself, pretty much. I had a little help from a patent attorney, and that went great. But then the patent office got a little more strict about how the drawings were done, and that got a little more difficult. I continued to do some of my own drawings. For my first 4 patents, I did all the drawings because a draftsman will cost you a fortune. And I did a lot of them using a drawing program, and I did it myself again. But the patent, you have to be careful. Again, I'll give you a couple of quick lessons about patents. First of all, if you do stuff before the year, you want to have non-disclosure agreements with the people you're working with, so they can't disclose it to anyone else. And in fact, that does buy you more time, because if you in fact operate under an agreement that says you're not disclosing anything, in quotes, you really have more time. That 1 year window isn't there. You could show it to people under a secrecy agreement, and only when the clock starts ticking when you file the provisional. So if you need to develop prototypes, and you have a non-disclosure agreement, that works really, really well for that. It buys you some time. The other pitfall is when you do the original provisional, what's in the provisional often determines what you'll have protection for in that 1 year. So you have to be a little careful to put enough in the provisional to make the claims for the patent, but not enough to screw you if you need to change it or do a different patent filing. So that's a little tricky, and I've made some mistakes along the way with that. My very first patent that got rejected was the provisional and the actual patent didn't have enough material in the actual patent writing to actually write the claims that I was making, and that was problematic. And the other pitfall is there's a real habit of the people writing the patents to write something called background of the invention. And when you write the background of the invention, those things are presumed to be known to everyone. And it's far better to write a section the inventor has discovered or the inventor has determined instead of background of the invention, because if you accidentally describe something in the background that then negates your patent, some people will hang you up on that in the future. So those are the big pitfalls of things I've learned along the way.
Wow.
So if I can add on to the idea of patenting, there's design patents, there's utility patents, method patents, and you've got to, a design patent isn't really, that's nice on the wall. That's about it. You've got to consider what type of patent you're actually going to be filing as well. And you want to have a very clear patent strategy. And you also want to be clear what you're going to disclose in a patent. Remember, you're teaching. One of the companies that I currently have, we have a combined strategy of patenting and trade secrets, because we can use a trade secret, because it's basically impossible for somebody to figure out what the formulation on this new material is. So you really have to think it through. It's not just a patent, and you have to again consider what type of patent.
And the other pitfall for use patents is if it's a patent for a specific use of a device, if the user violates the patent, you have to sue each user. If the company describes the use, you could sue the company for telling people to do something you have a protection on. So what a lot of companies do is they bypass a use patent by not telling anyone anything in their written literature, but the rep comes by and goes, wink, wink. By the way, did you know you could do this with that? And since it's not written down anywhere, you'd have to sue each surgeon using it to protect your own patent, and that's impossible. So that's another pitfall.
And I've had the great pleasure of being involved in patent litigation, and a 7-hour deposition taken by a Kirkland Ellis attorney was not a lot of fun.
Yeah,
not a lot of fun.
Okay. So let's talk. Sorry, Eugene. Yeah.
Yeah. One quick second thing to add. If you have for patents specifically, if you have multiple inventors, which the way that they define it is actually pretty complex, but if virtually anybody that touches the patent or the device or the engineering and brings something new to the table, they have to be part of that submission. They have to be listed as inventors, and they have to get something for it, even $1. So missing that could actually potentially invalidate your patent in the future. And I've seen that happen, and it's a terrible way to lose a patent.
Wow. It's great, absolutely great information. So I'm going to slightly switch gears and go into roadblocks and pitfalls, and how do ideas and companies self-destruct, or how do people destroy them in a way? You can, I've taken also a lot of executive education at Harvard Business School, and every case study has, not every case study, but quite a bit of case studies of how people made mistakes in the road during forks in the road. So maybe I want you guys to think about this for a second, and maybe we'll start with JP. What are the one or two classic mistakes we make along the road?
Oh gosh, there's so many more than one or two.
Okay, well,
so
2 times 10 to the 23. Yeah.
So let's look at the product. Let's look at the business plan. Let's look at the people.
Okay.
One of the spectacular failures I was involved with was a company where the founders and officers created a pro forma based on a product that they claimed had FDA approval, but it didn't. And they raised millions of dollars on this false claim and hid that from everybody and moved right along and continued to take more and on and on. And of course, that ended very badly. So, honesty is not something you always get. And I think the key is trust but verify is very, very important, especially if you assume some management role in that company. So there's an example for you. But beyond that, I think a lot of the failures are unrealistic expectations of the market size. People will often say, "Oh, the market's so big," but it isn't. I think it also is not knowing your customer. Healthcare is very complicated. Oftentimes, you'll make something for the customer. It might be the patient, but someone else is paying. And so you may make something perfect for the patient, but for a whole host of reasons, the payer doesn't want you to use it because it's either too expensive or something along those lines. And there's a whole lot of derivative innovation out there that founders are rather unrealistic about the reality of what they're creating. And I think you go down dead ends with some of these folks, particularly if you go along with them. So I think these are really important. I think the other thing that's interesting, and we talked a little bit about the different products that we're creating, et cetera. Do you have a product that requires significant inventory? And now you get into problems with cash flow and fulfillment because you have to create the inventory. It's a whole lot nicer if you're dealing with something that doesn't have inventory, like software. And even beyond that, it's probably not a bad idea to consider, okay, you got a great idea, great product. Is the timing right? Are you too early and you're going to run out of money while you're waiting for the idea to become attractive? And I've been on that line before. It's terrible if you're too late because then there are too many incumbents. And how do you survive along the way in terms of the funds you have available? And there's a whole host of questions there. One of the greatest ways to do it, I think, is to create a strategic relationship and have a licensing agreement that covers your burn rate. Because when you do that with a time limit and it's very attractive, you wind up having a bidding war. So, founders make all sorts of errors, including not matching their strategy to their financial view, falling in love with an idea that isn't going to be successful. I don't know about the question about fail fast. I don't think your investors want you to fail fast. They want you to fail at all. But the reality is that things can linger and go on, and it takes so long. So I don't want to go on and on about it, but I think the people who have done this before and gone full cycle, the people who have also had failures, are the best folks to be involved with because they understand failure and how to avoid it, and they understand how to go from point A all the way to point Z, and navigate their way around these problems. And they generally pick problems to solve that have a commercialization possibility.
Okay. Yeah, I want to make a comment first. I forgot all of you are my favorite entrepreneurs, but I forgot one of my favorites who is name's not on the board, but I think Kevin Rocco's among us. Kevin, are you there? Or you're still on mute or something like that. Yeah, Kevin Rocco created BioBrace, recently sold. So when Kevin gets his audio back, hopefully I'll hear him. So anyway, let's move around. Kevin Bonner, what do you think are some of the roadblocks that you wished wouldn't have existed?
Yeah, I think I don't know if it's a roadblock per se, but one of the issues I see a lot is, quite frankly, just running out of steam when it comes to orthopedic surgeons specifically. Most of us have day jobs, and a lot, developing an idea takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, sometimes a lot of money. And so I've seen a lot of very, very good ideas not make it because of the fact that people just ran out of steam and they were actually then developed elsewhere by somebody else. And so that's an issue. I think I completely agree with JP when it comes to, you may have a great idea, but the world may not be ready for it. And specifically, if nobody's going to pay for it, then it's not going to work. Or, you may have a good idea that's just too complicated. And the fact that it's just not going to work because it may be a fabulous idea, but it's just too complicated for most orthopedic surgeons to utilize. So I think that I would suggest looking for low-hanging fruit. A lot of people have good ideas. Look for problems where it shouldn't be that difficult to get a solution, and then it's got to be marketable. It can't, as JP said, it can't be too expensive. And then ultimately, if you're not going to develop it in your own company, it's got to be attractive to a larger company to acquire or to license. So, but getting back to your original question, one of the number one reasons for failure that I see is just people running out of energy because they get too busy with their day jobs.
Interesting. I don't know if Kevin, are you back on? Kevin Rocco?
Hey, Ira, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Kevin, what do you think was some of the big barriers you found early in your journey?
Yeah, so for the folks that don't know me, my name is Kevin Rocco. I started BioRes in 2016, sold it to ConMed last year. We had developed the BioBrace. I really appreciate people highlighting the success in failing. People probably don't know that I was the second full-time employee of a company called Soft Tissue Regeneration that had raised $13 million and essentially went under, and I was laid off. And that was really a valuable lesson. The roadblocks are numerous. I think for people on this call, it's important to appreciate that an idea is a good place to start, but it's so early. Ideas are relatively cheap. To transform an idea into a product and filing the intellectual property. I think the other important, this came up earlier, the other important thing to think about as you file that intellectual property, I would encourage, by the way, surgeons on this call that if they do have a good idea and they are willing to finance their own intellectual property, to go ahead and do it, and then go engage with industry and try to do something about it. But you should be aware that it starts the clock. Filing a provisional is cheap. Converting it into a full application is more expensive, and then converting it into international applications is usually 6 figures. So you start a clock, you start the process, and there are, I think, a lot of good points made about that. So happy to be here. I think I agree with the panel, a lot of good points. I'd be happy to speak to some of the specifics in my own journey if it were helpful.
All right. What else we got here? There you are, David. You moved on my screen.
One of the things I like to add, I'm in another group called Bone Chat, and it's a fellow named Tiger Buford who's pretty active on LinkedIn, and it's a private group. People here can get into it. You get a month free if you're interested. So Mark Viscogliosi was the first speaker, and he's actually speaking tomorrow. On his talk, and this was agreed by even a patent attorney, it was, don't put so much focus on patents. Your focus needs to be on the commercialization. What is it going to take to commercialize that product? And that means hiring a sales force, operations, logistics, all of the different components that go into bringing a product actually to market. You need the IP, but don't focus solely on the IP. And that was one of his big take-home messages from, between Mark and his brothers, pretty well known in the orthopedic space on company development. So I just thought I'd pass that along. As far as roadblocks go, it's resources, and resources are people and time and money and all of the above. I work for free on my companies. I work for equity, basically, but other people can't. They've got to pay the bills. So you've got to figure out how best to allocate all of the resources that you need. And that's a huge, huge barrier. Timing wise, don't fall in love with your idea. Absolutely do not. And again, get back to the process. I tell folks there are very few yeses to get a product adopted, but there are a tremendous number of no's. And think about the OR staff, how overworked they are, how overburdened they are, And if they're going to be stressed out with some new product, they're going to be a no. So have you actually designed for the OR staff? Is it something that a CFO is going to have to see, or is a materials manager, and what's their motivations? So there's tremendous number of roadblocks, and you've got to think about everybody who's going to touch your product. And if you don't, if you don't satisfy them, if you don't make them happy, then your product is probably not going to get adopted.
We have a raised hand, and I always go right to the raised hands. So Marty Nichols.
Yeah, I think one of the other things too, as a guy that comes from the industry side of it, if you're a physician and you have an idea, and especially if you're taking it to a manufacturer, alignment is really key as well. And I think so many people that have a really good idea are generally also decent volume surgeons. You need to make sure that the company is aligned with you, that they're going to commercialize your product, that they're not just bringing your IP in to take it in there while they're showing you their products and saying, hey, while we're going down this road, while we're developing it, have you tried this, or at least take a look at some of ours? Are they really interested in commercializing your product, or are they just trying to get your volume?
Fascinating. I also like to introduce someone else. Derek Haas is on the line. Derek, sorry to put you on the spot without this. Derek is the CEO of Avant-Garde, and you started that from scratch. What was some of the roadblocks along the way for you with this huge consulting revenue management and consulting company?
Yeah, I mean, I think to just touch on something other people haven't touched on so far is like, I mean, when you're starting a business out, I mean, you basically have no credibility at that point in time, and so it's extremely hard to get people to be those first initial clients. And when you're going to raise funding, basically the thing the investors care the most about is like, what is your early traction from like a revenue client perspective? They want to be able to see that there's somebody willing to pay for those products, and that it's repeatable. So just trying to hack your way into those first initial sales. For background people, we're like a software business as opposed to like a hardware business. So like what we're doing is not patentable from like an IP perspective. And so basically just trying to validate that there's a willingness to pay for your solution and that there's results and impact from it. Basically like the most important things for like a software business at the earliest stages, and is really hard when you don't have examples of other people using the product successfully. And another thing is, I mean, it's from our experience, like partnerships can be very helpful from like a go-to-market perspective, but it is easy to burn a ton of time on partnership conversations that don't end up going anywhere. And I forget who said earlier that like some of these larger companies, like it's a 2-year product development cycle, but people change jobs every 1.5 years, and that was a experience with a lot of the partnership conversations, as well as people would change roles before you could get very far with those partnership conversations.
Interesting. I'm very curious. I'm going to ask Eugene a question on this barriers. You developed a product, what I call if it came first. That's what I call that product. So if we had arthroscopes that didn't have wires, and then I tried to sell you a new invention, an arthroscope with a wire, you think I'm crazy. But you are up against an installed base of a huge number of arthroscopy towers and machines. And so what are some of the barriers you're facing now in commercialization?
Yeah, great question. So this is the latest iteration of the challenges we have to overcome. So you have the so earlier there was the discussion about you have to satisfy everybody. It's not enough that the surgeon gets it into their hand and they like it. The nursing staff, the PAs, the SPD, they all have to like it. Everybody around that room has to feel like they were taken care of with whatever you're doing, not just our device, but just in general. Then the finance people, you have to show value. You have to show what the financials look like. You have to make sure that you can guarantee support. This is, I think, there was big discussion earlier on. You have to build a company for sales, which is 150% true. And then you also have to build a company for support. If you don't have that support portion, if you don't have the ability to support virtually at a drop of a hat, you're not going to be taken seriously because you're up against all the incumbents. So that's the major other thing is, yeah, the install base for our product is potentially huge. And there was a comment earlier, like, don't get starry-eyed about a very big market share. What we're up against is all of these companies. When we go into a facility, no names being named, but you can imagine the orange logo or the A logo. They find out about it and they come in and they instantly descend on the same facility and they start saying, well, you have a contract with us, or we'll make it free. We'll make whatever system you're using free, or we'll give you some major discount. Just don't install this system. And so it becomes a really interesting conversation with the facility, with the surgeons. And so you're facing both financial headwinds, like it costs money to install our product, but it also, you're up against the incumbents. But the interesting thing is, so the other side of that coin is, as long as the story you can tell and the product that you can show and all the people in the room that like it can say, hey, I really like this, all of those things can be overcome, right? All those barriers can be overcome. And then really the major thing is to focus on 5 or 10 or 15 facilities, capture those facilities, support those facilities, do a wonderful job at those facilities, show that little bit of revenue, and then you have sort of your optionality, right? You can go and exit or have a bidding war with the strategics, or if you want to, you can at that point choose to keep growing and throwing off revenue. But this is sort of one of those main bits is you have to land before you can expand. And it's the challenge, right? The technical challenges are massive that we had to overcome. The FDA challenge was crazy. We had to prove so much stuff. But now the sales and marketing challenge, I would almost posit is the hardest thing we've ever done, and maybe the hardest thing that we'll actually ever do as a company, because it is so challenging to come into these facilities that have all this incumbency. But it is also, if you have a great product, if you have a solution and you work with surgeons, you can overcome all that.
We have one last question, and we're going to go around the panel room with some summary comments. So think of your summary comments after this question by Sepida Bagian, who happens to be the Chief of Hand Surgery at Bronx Care Health System. Dr. Bagian, Sepida.
Hi, thank you. I just had a very simple question. I have what I've MacGyvered something that I've been using for years that's been very helpful, and I feel it's cut back on OR time and also, like, OR, in surgical exposure and that sort of thing. And I was just wondering, what is the path of least resistance to potentially marketing that? I'm not looking to start my own, business in that. I just wanted to share something with the rest of, the hand society world, and hopefully make life easier for my colleagues, and hopefully improve or speed up recovery time for after the surgery also for patients. So
who wants to take that question, that answer? I don't know. David.
Yeah, is it an instrument?
well, it's something I kind of modified. I call it MacGyvering. I just
But is it an implant or an instrument?
It's not an implant. It's an instrument.
Okay. It's an instrument. Okay. Go to Inamed.
Yeah, go to Inamed.
Go to Inamed.
Okay.
If they can sell 25, they'll make it.
And what's the path of least, like, do I have to invest in an attorney first, or an engineer, or?
No, go to Inamed.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's the quickest, easiest.
Yeah, retractors. Yeah, that's a great question. All right, let's summarize a little bit. Let's start. Maybe we'll start with Kevin. You're in the middle there, in my view. A few summary comments about the pathway, a little bit. Some encouraging comments to some of the youngsters on here, which is everybody but me. Yeah.
I'd say for the younger folks, I'd say keep a little book next to your bed and write your good ideas down, and then look at them again and see if they stay good ideas. And then, I'd say have confidence, and quite frankly, I think this innovation, this is fun. When we all start orthopedics, we're all worried about just gaining more knowledge, and we don't know very much, and eventually you get more and more experience. Well, I think a lot of us have gotten to the point where what really makes our lives fun is to come up with some new ideas. So I would encourage a lot of young people to try to develop your ideas. And it really does. It's a lot of fun to watch an idea actually come to fruition. So what I would encourage all the young, surgeons out there to write your ideas down and actually try to develop them if you think they have legs.
Great. JP, few comments?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, I think Derek Haas posted a very nice article entitled Why Startups Fail. Everybody should take a look at that, because understanding failure is a good way to avoid it. That said, I found that, there's a jockey, there's a horse, there's really smart people out there, but one of the most important factors in the success of a real interesting idea, a real good company, not a one-off instrument or something like that, is timing. And the time is right sometimes, and the time is not right other times. And it's the case we have great ideas, but they have to be in context of the macroeconomics that we live in. They have to be in context of incumbents that are there. And we've touched on this a bit. What is the willingness of partners or strategics, if you will, to accept something? I give a case in point. ViewMed is about 15 years now into the process. We almost died on several occasions. We had to get rid of CEO. We had to buy back stock. All sorts of problems were made. And all along the way, we didn't take any outside money. We bootstrapped the whole thing. And now it's a brilliant vertical journey, and it was worth the pain and the stress associated with it. But I learned a huge amount in the process. And that's completely different when you're creating a platform to become a network than when you're creating a product that you're going to sell to people.
Yeah.
And I think it's very important for people to understand the different business models out there have a lot to do with how you go about what you're doing. Another one was creating Imiscap, which became Blueprint, which was a software platform that drove a hardware pipeline, and completely changed the landscape of shoulder arthroplasty, and frankly, it's going to change other arthroplasty as well. So you have to understand what field you're playing in. You have to understand being patient. You have to understand the timing of what you're doing, and that's at least some of the lessons that I've learned so far.
Great. Alan?
Yeah, I think I just want to go back to two pitfalls just to remind people, and then I'll talk about something more optimistic. The willingness to pay does not always mean or translate into royalties. Just because someone wants to buy your patent doesn't mean they want to market it. And it's a little pitfall people don't see, is that sometimes they have their own competitive product that they put hundreds of millions of dollars into, and it's infinitely cheaper for them to give you a number and give you a royalty agreement and never market your product and put it on the shelf. And I've had that experience as well. And also it's easy sometimes when they see your patent, how they can jury rig something else that would be better and different and skirt your patent completely. So those are little pitfalls. And the contracts with the one-ups, that's the other little pitfall, is that, you know, I have a product, is shoulder holder, and I have a position, and I have a gel splint. And all of them are fantastic products. They're made by a small company in Connecticut, proprietary materials and trade secrets, plus some patents. And the end of the day is every time they go to a shop that has one of the big letter names in front of it, they're getting all their TVs for free. None of them want to use it, even if it's half the price, because they have to use X number of dollars of the soft goods to get the free TV. And so this company can't even get in the door, and that's very difficult. On the flip side, the optimistic side, great ideas do float to the top. Timing is important, but I think it's easy to find a local machine shop near you, usually, or even, you know, a marine shop. My first invention, a marine shop built it for me. They made it so heavy because they're afraid the patient's arm was going to, no one could lift it. But if you have a great idea, there's a hand surgeon was on with her idea about, you know, go to a machine shop, draw some drawings, and have them make it, and see what that looks like. And then you can make more advances. You might make a better design, or go to the innovative people who make the products and give you a straight up royalty, and have them make it. But go ahead and make it. Don't be afraid. You know, I think so many great ideas are thought up in the middle of the night, written down on a piece of paper, and then someone doesn't have it made. But even the process of just making one for yourself, you'll learn a lot. So I think it's worth it. Don't be afraid to try.
Great. Eugene?
Yeah, I would say choose your partners carefully, choose your investors carefully, and try to find the best of the best. Like, it's one of those things, like, it's a journey. It can be a very long journey. And if you're a founder, it can also be a very lonely journey. And so just think about how much time you're going to spend and what you're going to dedicate to it, and choose the people and the partners you're going to be spending that time with. I heard the comparison that you'll end up spending more time with these people than you do like with your married partner. And that's probably true.
Wow. Kevin Rocco, you still there? Couple of comments? I'll get back to you.
Yeah, I'm here. I think.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
I'm
okay.
here. There you are. Sorry, I'm traveling. Listen, great points made. Totally agree with the correction about it's not all about the IP. You know, if you want to be super smart about it, work backwards from the end. Work backwards from what's going to motivate a large company paying you a lot of money to acquire this. It's got to provide value for the physician, the patient, the payer, the provider, the institution. And, you know, if anybody on this call is working on something, please reach out to me, LinkedIn, whatever. I'm happy to talk to you, happy to help. And I want to see more innovation in the ecosystem. I think it requires partnerships between surgeons, full-time entrepreneurs, full-time engineers, and, you know, let's work together to improve healthcare. Thank you for having me.
Yes. And we'll go to Derek, and then we'll end up with David. Derek, a couple of comments of encouragement for young entrepreneurs like yourself, even.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's obviously been a hard journey, but I've enjoyed it, and I still feel like I have the same passion, if not more passion, for the business now as when I started 9 years ago. And so I think obviously many people do get burned out along the way, but I think you choose something you find meaning in, and you enjoy the people that you work with, it'll be a lot of fun. And there's nothing else I can imagine doing more than what I'm doing right now.
Great. And we're David, the consummate entrepreneur, I'd like you to bring us home, please.
Yeah. So there's a phrase, change brings opportunity. We are in the tipping point in healthcare. Things are not going to continue as they were 5 years ago. And they just can't. The economics just are not going to permit it. There's going to be realignment. There's going to be new things that are going to happen. There's going to be huge opportunities, and there's going to be winners and losers. And it's not always predicated on who is in control right now, because things have to change. And it's just be ready for it. And, you can flourish in that sort of environment if you anticipate the changes. So that's somewhat optimistic, I hope.
Oh, it is. First of all, we
Yeah.
went over a little tonight, and I so much want to thank everybody who was with us tonight, all the speakers, panelists. This will be recorded on and put on the Joey site and on YouTube. And everyone on this call is always available to everyone, because I just know all of you are good people and works out that way. So I want to say thanks to everybody and good night.